Would you believe me if I told you that an engine with just 6 cylinders in a row, 250 cubic inches, once left powerful V8s in the dust at the drag strip? That's no myth. That's the Chevy 250 Inline-6, a machine born with a simple purpose: fuel economy, durability, and reliability for everyday sedans and pickups. But its destiny was far from ordinary. From hiding inside budget Camaros and Novas, to dominating races in South America, and even serving in military vehicles, this i6 proved that fewer cylinders doesn't mean less power. And then, it vanished. No farewell, no headlines, just silence. This video uncovers the forgotten truth: why the Chevy 250 was underestimated, and why it deserves to be remembered as a silent warrior of the American muscle era. By the early 1960s, Chevrolet faced a dilemma. They dominated the market with V8s, but lacked a modern inline-six engine to compete with Ford and Chrysler in the bread-and-butter sedan segment. The aging 235 i6 was obsolete, and its 1963 successor, the 230 inline-six, while improved, was criticized for lacking low-end torque, a crucial trait for pickups and taxis, which made up a huge chunk of GM's sales. Meanwhile, Ford had just introduced the powerful and durable 240 i6. GM couldn't afford to sit still. In 1966, they stretched the piston stroke of the 230, creating the new 250 cubic inch displacement, and thus the Chevy 250 Inline-6 was born. The mission was clear: build a 6-cylinder engine with strong torque, reliable operation, easy maintenance, and above all, excellent fuel economy. Gas prices were rising, and whispers of a future oil crisis were already echoing through the industry. Chevrolet wanted this engine compact enough to fit everything from the Nova, Chevelle, Camaro to C10 pickups and commercial vehicles, and they succeeded. The 250 became the quiet heartbeat of millions of American cars for nearly 2 decades. At first glance, the Chevy 250 Inline-6 looks simple: a cast-iron block, overhead valve design with a side-mounted camshaft and push rods. But its simplicity was its greatest strength. Compared to Ford's 240 i6, with only 4 main bearings, the Chevy 250 had 7 main bearings, offering far smoother operation and increased durability under heavy loads or high RPM. That made it a favorite for commercial vehicles and light trucks. With a long piston stroke, 3.53 inches, and a modest compression ratio, 8.5 to 1, the 250 produced 235 pound-feet of torque at 275 degrees, just 1,600 RPM. Perfect for workhorse applications like pickups and delivery vans. In 1968, GM introduced the integral head design, where intake and exhaust ports were cast into the cylinder head. This improved airflow, reduced leakage, and boosted fuel efficiency. Though performance builders disliked its limitations, it became standard for commercial use. The Rochester Mono J carburetor was dead simple and reliable, paired with a low-rise intake that kept things cool, ideal for low-octane fuel in Latin American markets. Its 155 horsepower at 4,200 RPM may not sound exciting, but in real-world use, it delivered deep, usable torque, right where working drivers needed it most. In the US, many Nova and base Camaro owners chose to keep their 250 instead of swapping to a V8. Why? With a few simple upgrades, triple carb setup, a performance cam, and free-flowing exhaust, this i6 could push over 250 horsepower, all while delivering excellent low-end torque. At local drag strips, spectators watched 250-powered Novas outrun 289 V8 Mustangs off the line. They didn't always win the quarter mile, but their launch was strong and consistent, thanks to low-end grunt and lighter front ends. In Brazil, the 250 powered the Opala 250S, which made a name for itself in the Turismo Carretera racing series during the 1970s. It wasn't just powerful, it thrived in the country's hot, humid climate. By the late 70s, Argentina's military even installed a naturally aspirated version of the 250 into their Grumete light-duty trucks, not just for power, but because parts were common, maintenance was easy, and it could handle 120-degree Fahrenheit desert heat. Despite its real-world performance, the Chevy 250i6 was slowly pushed aside. Ironically, GM itself helped bury it through its own marketing strategy. By the late 1960s, the horsepower war was in full swing, and American buyers were obsessed with numbers. More cylinders meant more status. Dealerships labeled six-cylinder cars as cheap, pushing customers to upgrade to V8s for that sense of power and prestige. As a result, the 250 was seen as the poor man's engine, chosen not for performance, but for affordability. This stigma stuck, even though the engine was rock-solid and reliable. Worse still, the 1970s brought strict emissions controls. GM engineers added smog pumps, lean carb tuning, and vapor recovery systems, which made the 250 harder to maintain and robbed it of power. Adding insult to injury, newer small-block V8s, like the 305, now equipped with catalytic converters, could match or beat the 250's fuel economy while delivering more horsepower. It cemented the idea, if I'm burning gas anyway, why not get a V8? And so, despite its legacy on the street, track, and even battlefield, the Chevy 250 Inline-6 was quietly phased out, uncelebrated, and underappreciated. By the 1980s, the Chevy 250 Inline-6 was becoming a forgotten figure in its own home. As the industry leaned into downsizing, GM prioritized smaller, lighter engines, like the Buick 3.8-liter V6, nearly 70 pounds lighter than the 250i6, and easier to meet emissions standards. It saved money, simplified chassis designs, and improved front-end balance. At the same time, performance wasn't the top priority anymore. Buyers now cared more about fuel efficiency and modern electronics, areas where the 250, designed in the 60s, struggled without a complete redesign. In 1984, GM quietly ended production of the Chevy 250 in the US. No fanfare, no special edition, no farewell tour. But that wasn't the end. In Brazil, where the Opala was still popular, production of the 250 continued under a new name, the 4.1-liter 250M, all the way until 1998. They even explored ethanol-burning variants for domestic use. It proved that while the 250 may have been forgotten in America, somewhere else in the world, it kept breathing, quietly and dependably, just as it always had. Though it was discontinued in the US, the design of the Chevy 250 didn't disappear. It left a clear legacy in several engines that followed, both inside and outside of GM. Most notably, the Jeep 258 CID Inline-6 developed by AMC. Few realize that during AMC's late 60s collaboration with GM on parts sourcing, the 7-main bearing crankshaft design of the Chevy 250 directly influenced the Jeep engine's architecture. The result? The Jeep 4.2 became a legend for durability in early CJ and Wrangler models, known for its strong, low-end torque, just like the 250's philosophy. Within GM itself, when they revived the Inline-6 in the early 2000s, they didn't start from scratch. The Vortec 4200LL8, launched in 2002 in vehicles like the Trailblazer and Envoy, used a modern DOHC 24-valve layout, but retained the same long-stroke 240 torque-first character of the old 250. In fact, internal GM documents once described the Vortec 4200 as a modern interpretation of the old-school torque-rich inline-6. So even though it's no longer built, the Chevy 250i6 never truly disappeared, at least not from the hearts of vintage car enthusiasts and the growing restoration communities across the US, Brazil, and Argentina, ranging from Nova and Chevelle restorers to drag racers building 250AS with over 300 horsepower. Annual events like the Six Banger Nationals in Kentucky celebrate these engines as unique mechanical icons. Thanks to modern EFI tech, the Chevy 250 is easier than ever to revive. Holley's Sniper EFI system lets you convert to electronic fuel injection without a full rebuild, boosting power, improving cold starts, and increasing fuel efficiency. Other bolt-on upgrades like Clifford 6 equals 8 headers, performance cams, and electronic ignition have made the 250A go-to budget hot rod choice, especially for US high schoolers and engineering students looking to go fast without spending V8 money. Meanwhile, in Brazil, shops still stock parts for the 250M and even ethanol-compatible versions, proof that the 250's legacy isn't just in museums, but still rolling on the streets, quietly and reliably, just like it always did. From a humble workhorse to a quiet legend, the Chevy 250 Inline-6 proved that torque, durability, and persistence could create greatness without needing a V8 roar. It once pulled pickups through deserts, gripped drag strips, and took millions of Americans to work every day, then disappeared without a trace. But to those who knew it, the 250i6 was never just a number. Have you ever driven, fixed, or simply admired this inline-6? Drop a comment below, share your story, or tell us about the car you had with a Chevy 250 under the hood. And if you believe this story deserves to be heard again, like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep reviving these forgotten legends.